Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the Iranian anthem, Ey Iran.
ای ایران ای مرز پرگوهر، ای خاکت سرچشمه هنر، دور از تو اندیشه بدان، پاینده مانی تو جاودان. ای دشمن ار تو سنگ خاره ای جان من فدای خاک پاک میهنم، مهر تو چون شد پیشم، دور از تو نیست اندیشم، در راه تو کی ارزشی دارد این جان ما، پاینده باد خاک ایران ما. ایران ای خرم بهشت من، روشن است و سرنوشت من، گر آتش بارد به پیکرم، جز مهرت در دل نپرورم. با آب و خاک و مهر تو سرشته شد گلم، مهر اگر برون رود تهی شود دلم، مهر تو چون شد پیشم، دور از تو نیست اندیشم، در راه تو کی ارزشی دارد این جان ما، پاینده باد خاک ایران ما.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our conference, Free Iran, Solutions to Warmongering, Terror, and Internal Repression. My name is Anna Sami, and it is my distinct pleasure to serve as your MC today. Your attendance just 1 week after the sham elections in Iran, amid the ongoing Middle East turmoil that Tehran seeks to exploit, and notably on the heels of International Women's Day, gains added significance, considering that the movement for change in Iran is spearheaded by women, serving as the driving force for transformation. As a second-generation Iranian-American and an immigration attorney in Washington, D.C., I hear the stories of people who have lived under the current theocracy in Iran. In my role, I have had the privilege of being a conduit for the voices of those whose narratives often go unheard. The stories I hear are not just accounts of individual experiences, they are the collective voices of a people enduring the challenges imposed by the current theocratic regime in Iran. My connection to these stories is personal, and I am acutely aware of the struggles faced by those who yearn for a more just and inclusive society in Iran. The narratives I encounter daily are a testament to the resilience, courage, and unwavering spirit of a people determined to overcome adversity. Our collective responsibility is to amplify these voices, to bring attention to the struggle faced by Iranians, to work towards a country where freedom, justice, and dignity are not mere aspirations, but tangible realities. The uprisings in Iran have consistently centered around opposing all forms of dictatorship. Chants of death to Khamenei and death to the dictator have been coupled with down with the oppressor, be it the Shah or the supreme leader. Women have taken a noteworthy and prominent role in these protests, and there is reasoning behind this. Over the last 4 decades, women have been at the forefront of opposition against the regime. A considerable number of them have opted to participate in the resistance units, leading the charge on the streets. Distinguished speakers, including leaders of the Iranian resistance and Americans who advocate for the Iranian resistance, will share their insights, contributing to the development of a sound policy regarding Iran. Included in this distinguished array is the 70th Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo, General James Jones, General Wesley Clark, and Ambassador Robert Joseph. With that, it is my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, joining us live via satellite from Europe, Mrs. Maryam Rajavi, the President-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. We welcome your remarks.
situation enables us to correctly assess the past and see the future solution. When it comes to the past, history has proven that appeasement leads to war. The change in behavior of Iran's rulers is an illusion. The policy of providing incentives to the mullahs has only emboldened them and bringing the world closer to war. As Secretary Pompeo emphasized in his recent article, appeasement has never worked a single time in history, and it won't work now. Now, let us look forward to the future for the right solution. One solution is to contain the mullahs regime, which is the source of warmongering and terrorism. However, while this is a step forward and may have a temporary impact, but it will not resolve the problem. The correct and fundamental solution lies in the overthrow of the clerical regime by the Iranian people through their uprisings and organized resistance. Ignoring the desires of the Iranian people, the explosive conditions in Iran, and the crucial role of organized resistance is the missing link in the policy on Iran. Practical steps must be taken to address the suppression of the people of Iran and the regime's warmongering in the region. Comprehensive sanctions, including those on oil trade and banking activities, are crucial and must be implemented. However, the only solution is uprising to overthrow the regime. The people's uprisings and the September 2022 uprising, along with thousands of anti-repression acts by resistance units across Iran, as well as the recent nationwide boycott of the sham elections, show that the regime's overthrow is within reach. This is the correct path to establishing democracy in Iran and promoting peace and tranquility in the region and the world. The current situation requires that the international community adopt a right and firm policy vis-à-vis the religious dictatorship ruling Iran. Yes, Iran will be free and a democratic republic will be established, and as the late President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, said, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Now, it is the responsibility of the international community to recognize and support the Iranian people's struggle to overthrow the regime and the resistance units' right to combat the IRGC. I thank you all.
I want to extend my sincere appreciation to Mrs. Rajavi for her eloquent remarks, which echo the sentiments of the Iranian people and underscore the shared responsibility we all bear in fostering change in Iran. It is with utmost honor that I invite to the stage an individual who has consistently supported the Iranian people and their organized resistance in recent years. His actions and calls for accountability have undeniably angered the Iranian mullahs. Please welcome the 70th Secretary of State of the United States, the Honorable Mike Pompeo.
Thank you so much. Bless you. Bless you all. Good afternoon. When I get that much applause before I speak, I get very nervous. It is so wonderful. Thank you. It's so wonderful. It is so wonderful to be back here today with so many friends at the Trump Hotel. So many people who came together and are committed to seeing a free Iran. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge the many people so far from here who are watching, taking risk to their own lives. Bless you all for what you do each and every day. I want to thank Generals Jones and Wesley for being here. Ambassador Joseph is here as well. So many other dignitaries too. You know, the last time I was with you all was on October 6th. Just 24 hours later, the Iranian regime conducted one of the most barbaric attacks in the last decades. In those very remarks on October 6th, I warned that continued appeasement of the regime would embolden it and would further it and cause terrible consequences for the people of Iran and for the region and the world. I couldn't have predicted precisely what happened that day, but we now all know what happened on October 7th. And months since that, the brutality and the violence, beyond so much understanding, all orchestrated and fueled by the regime in Tehran. We know that further appeasement will lead to further death and destruction. Today, I want to ask every person here, to consider some basic facts. These are indisputable. First, Tehran continues to portray an image of stability beside nationwide protests from 2017. You know this, the regime's goal is pretty simple. It is to project power throughout the region. It is to frighten the Gulf Arab states, the Israelis, everyone in the region. We all want just the opposite, and we're going to get it. Second, Tehran is orchestrating the conflicts we see in Israel today, in the Red Sea, where Americans were killed, and all across the region, because it wants the global situation, the global attention to be on it, on its proxies. It wants to distract us from its own internal weakness. This is something we all know. We must not let them do this. Third, Tehran wants to use its terror and mayhem spread by its proxies to get concessions from us, to put fear here in the United States and in its leadership. We should never give in to its demands or reward its brutality and its destruction. We cannot let that happen. Fourth, Tehran's great hope, indeed its prayer, is to portray what is happening in the region as a fight between Israel and the Palestinian people. This is a lie. We must meet it with the truth that the head of the snake of global terror lies in Tehran. The solution to today's conflict is not to negotiate. It is not to negotiate a two-state solution. It is to confront and destroy the regime in Tehran. The final fact I want you all to consider is that Tehran benefits from anybody who blames Israel, the Palestinian people, for the violence that we're seeing. We know, you know, who Hamas takes its orders from. We know, you know, where it gets its money and its guidance and its training. The epicenter of terror. It is highly unstable, rejected by its own people, and doomed to be overthrown, but they want to tell you that these proxies are just bad actors. We must watch a determination and a potent organized resistance continue to grow. It is now seasoned with decades of fighting against this malign dictatorship and the theocracy. I am confident that this resistance will only increase. May God bless it. You know, I've talked about Tehran as the head of the snake. I was mocked from time to time. It's okay. I think the world, frankly, though, is finally starting to recognize even more broadly, even more deeply, we should take cheer in that. We've seen it, right? From supporting proxies that vehemently oppose Middle East peace, to threatening ships and free trade in the Red Sea, to targeting American forces in the region using drones, and now colluding with rogue actors, bad dictators like Vladimir Putin, to kill people, innocent civilians in Ukraine. And so this recognition of Tehran as the epicenter, the head of the snake, can't come too soon. Since this past December, the regime's begun holding sham trials. You all have all seen it. There was one just this past week. We watched them continue to undermine the very spirit of the people that they are supposed to be supporting. We've seen them conduct trials in absentia that target members of the MEK, the main opposition movement. These men and women who live all across Europe, including in France and in Albania, know the truth. The regime wishes to create a phony legal precedent against them and have them extradited to Iran, or uses false claims to justify terror against them. I hope and I pray that countries like the United States and all across Europe will reject this for the sham that it is. You know, we've watched too the regime continue to target the resistance at Ashraf 3, a place that I had the privilege to visit not too long ago, where I met in a place with just simple people, dedicated people, noble men and women who have committed their entire lives to liberate their fellow countrymen. These remarkable, fun, smart, courageous individuals have, not surprisingly, become the target of the mullahs, who want very much to see the destruction of them and of their institutions. Indeed, many of the folks who I met with when I traveled there were survivors. They were witnesses of the 1988 massacre, whose main target and the majority of its victims were members of the MEK. To see the butcher of Tehran nominally in charge of that place today surely breaks so many hearts, including, I'm sure, yours, and I know mine. We, the United States, has to do everything it can. We have many tools. We have to ensure the continued safety and security of the people living at Ashraf 3, and I hope that our lawmakers and our leaders all across the political spectrum will take prompt and appropriate steps to help the government of Albania uphold all of the fundamental rights of the people that are living there, the residents of Ashraf 3, especially they have not given up their rights to the basics, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, much like we have in America. I pray that the United States will support the Albanian government in protecting the freedom of assembly and of expression for the people who are living there. You know, as the world continues to arise and wake up to the Iranian regime's malevolence, the situation inside of Iran has changed too. It's become more unstable and more dangerous. They are ever closer today to having a nuclear weapon, and indeed a nuclear weapons program, than they have ever been. We've watched the Iranian regime as it's resorted to an unprecedented level of repression. You all know that. You have friends, you have family who are living there. The recorded number of executions in 2023 alone reached no less than 860, marking the highest figure in the past 8 years. These executions have also been on the rise in 2024. The pattern continues. This is a clear indication that the Iranian regime knows that it is weak, that it fears the very people that they are executing. This is all the while the nation of Iran has become more wealthy. This is while the Iranian regime has been illicitly selling oil and getting rewarded with billions of dollars using hostages for diplomacy. On March 1st, Iran held yet another sham election. You all watched it. This election for the Assembly of Experts once again denied the people of Iran the capacity to cast real votes in a meaningful way for the candidates that they preferred. So many decided not to participate in the election as a result of that. The good news is what we saw that day. What we saw that day was an echo of what we saw in 2022, an uprising where protesters all across Iran chanted "Down with the oppressor," be it the Shah or the supreme leader. I didn't get an opportunity at the beginning to congratulate Mrs. Madam Rajavi, and her movement for leading the boycotts of these elections. And having done so now for decades, yes, she should be deeply thanked for that. You and I, every American should know the history. We know the history that it was the MEK that boycotted December 1979 referendum and did not endorse that flawed constitution. And it did so despite becoming the main target of the ruling clergy's wrath, as a result of which it suffers to this day. Now, think about this. Now, decades later, this same nation rejected the clergy's rule and sought a free republic based on the fundamental separation of religion and state. I think everyone who speaks about this should just be clear. You won this victory by sticking to your principles and being ready to pay the price for it. Thank you for that. You all know what Iran is going to be, what it can be. Iran could be an incredibly rich, prosperous country. We know this. Where do its resources and riches go today? They fund terror. Billions of dollars are spent on Iranian proxy forces every year. The people of Iran know this too, not just those of us on the outside. Ever since the protests began back in 2017, the Iranian people have been chanting, "Neither Gaza nor Lebanon, I give my life for Iran." They yell, "Leave Syria alone, think about us." Look, the people of Iran won't be fooled. You know this. The people of Iran won't be fooled by the mullahs. No matter what the regime says, no matter what it tells them, no matter how much pain it inflicts, the Iranian people know, because they are brave, and they are decent, and they are noble, especially the young people. They remain focused on the singular goal, bringing down the ruling theocracy and building a country that fulfills the promise of Iran, a nation that has historically prized freedom, and a people that still do, a nation that abhors tyranny, and a people that still do. It wants peaceful coexistence with its neighbors. This is what I pray for. This is what we all must continue to work for. When you translate that into a set of principles, you get precisely what Mrs. Rajavi has put in her 10-point plan for the future of Iran. The 10 points matter. The 10 points matter, and they're gaining tremendous steam, but we also should focus on the principle, which is the central feature, which is the future for a free and prosperous Iran. You know, I remember when I became Secretary of State. It seems like a long time ago now. I remember when I became Secretary of State, I found it interesting. I find it interesting that the mullahs constantly say there is no alternative to their regime, and yet spend $1 billion to defend against that very alternative. They spend all of their political capital, they spend all their time, all their resources, denying the alternative possibilities. They waged several rounds of major cyber attacks against Albania, asking that government to silence the main opposition. What is it they are afraid of if there's no alternative? You know this. Every single week, and largely as a matter of course, every single week, inside every single city in Iran, the regime directs its Friday prayers to its leaders to chant against a non-existent alternative. All this energy should encourage us. It should remind us that the only alternative is the resistance and the efforts to upend this evil regime. I'll end with a few thoughts. I want to encourage everyone here today and anyone watching, whether it's on a VPN in Esfahan or in Denver or in Paris or at Ashraf 3. Iran will be freed by its freedom fighters. You can feel it. You can feel it in this room here in Washington, D.C. The resistance movement is real, and it is a nightmare for the IRGC. Those of us with the capacity to impact the world and how it responds to the amazing work of these resistance fighters can't let them down. The Iranian regime wants to be rewarded for its terrorism. We can never do that. Hostage-taking, proxy wars, these are the tools of weak men. The strength lies with the Iranian people. Reward them, not the terrorists. I hear talk in global capitals that says if we treat the Iranian regime badly, that they will escalate their conflict with the rest of us. They suggest somehow that a determined effort to deter the regime from its terror and support the people of Iran will somehow create World War III. The evil we saw on October 7th against an innocent people in the desert of Israel should remove any idea from anyone's mind that weakness will generate peace. It is not possible. I remember the debates inside of our own administration when the risk of deterrence failing had become even more real. Our embassy, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, was under attack. The regime in Iran had taken down a U.S. drone in international airspace. And we were contemplating how is it we are going to restore deterrence and, again, provide more support to the Iranian people. The central idea was that if we appeased them, somehow they might stop. The data suggested precisely the opposite. In the end, the decision by President Trump was to take a strike against the number 2 leader of Iran. And we sit here today with factual evidence that suggests it was that action that created more stability, more opportunity, more hope in that region than there had been in an awfully long time. So let's get it right. Let's get it right. Leaders in Europe, leaders in the West, let's get it right. The Iranian people have not asked for boots on the ground. They haven't asked for our young men and women to risk their lives. They have only asked us to support them so that they may do the right thing for their children and grandchildren, and they are prepared to risk their lives for that. butcher of Tehran fears us. The butcher of Tehran and his fellow mullahs know that paranoia is the right place for them to find themselves. For our efforts to create basic human rights for the people of Iran, to deliver basic freedoms for the people of Iran will not cease. They will not end. These freedom fighters on the ground inside of Iran will ultimately deliver an outcome, much like the freedom fighters did for the people of the United States of America now 250 years ago. And they will find themselves leaders of which the whole world will look 250 years after their hard work, their risk-taking, their efforts to deliver Iran as a better nation. I'm confident that this will happen. I do not know the day, but I know the day will arrive. This is the page. This is the page that must be turned. This is the page that will be turned by hard work from the people, the resistance inside of Iran. And it is the page that will be turned when people like you, who came out on this Saturday afternoon to be in community, to support that very effort, will deliver a free Iran. God bless you. God bless the resistance. And may God bless the United States of America. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you all.
I am now honored to introduce to you General Wesley Clark. General Clark retired as a 4-star general after 38 years in the United States Army, having served in his last assignments as commander of the U.S. Southern Command and as the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. He graduated as valedictorian of his class at West Point and completed degrees in philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University. As a Rhodes Scholar, please welcome General Clark.
Mrs. Rajavi, ladies and gentlemen, General Jones, Ambassador Joseph, sorry Secretary Pompeo ducked out, but what an honor it is to be here with you and to feel the force of this community in Washington and around the world pressing for change and democracy in Iran. For 4 decades, the Ayatollahs have waged war, sparked conflict, terrorized their own people. This regime in Iran is on its last legs. Isn't it time to finish it off? You know, for Americans, it began with the seizure of the American embassy and the assassination and murder of Iranian friends who had been educated, worked with, or associated with the United States. For the people of Iran, the nightmare of this regime was the dawning recognition that the intimidation and terror of the Savak was being replaced by something far worse, a suffering, suffocating, murderous grip on the aspirations and hopes of a noble people. It's time to end that suffocation. Let's look at it first from the perspective of the United States. The regime in Iran named foreign adversaries, Satans, I guess to seek some kind of legitimacy. And for over 4 decades, its foreign policy has been duplicitous with the West, smiling on the one hand and on the other, waging conflict and war through proxies, aiming at domination of its neighbors in the region. You know, the regime does run a global terrorist network that traffics in arms, assassinations, smuggling, other criminal activities. Its Hezbollah affiliate in Lebanon controls much of Lebanon. It's used it as a base for aggression. Its trafficking with Bashar al-Assad in Syria propped up that murderous regime. Its militia organizations in Iraq and Syria intimidate the legitimate governments of Iraq and are themselves engaged in terrorism. And it has cynically exploited internal frictions in Yemen to wage war on Saudi Arabia and now on international shipping in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. The regime has developed ballistic missiles. It launches them from Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen, disrupting international commerce, and oh, by the way, attempting to perfect its system while it wages war through proxy. The tragedy in the current war in the Middle East would never have happened without arms, funding, support, and courage, likely direction from the regime in Tehran. And we have to call that regime out for this. In a few months, we can expect Iran to declare itself as a nuclear weapons state. The Ayatollahs probably believe that this will enable them to intensify their attacks on Israel in the West without reprisal. But they're wrong. It will certainly provoke a nuclear arms race, destabilize the region, and may provoke a wider war. I say this to my friends in the West. We can no longer afford to temporize, dawdle, appease, and hope in dealing with this regime that something is going to change. It won't. But it's Iran's own citizens, and especially the women of Iran, who pose the greatest threat to the Ayatollahs. They know it, and you are the key to peace and stability in this region. Ms. Mariam Rajavi and the National Council of Resistance of Iran and the MEC have proven over the years that they have staying power, determination, courage, will, and the power to eventually overthrow this regime. You know, for decades, those who challenged the regime to live up to its proclaimed pretensions of democracy have been mercilessly hunted down, imprisoned, and murdered. And no one knows it better than you all. These periodic elections that were held, where Iran claimed to be the only democracy and the real democracy of the Middle East, they weren't real elections. The votes were garnered through illusion and intimidation, and the choices were just various cliques of the same tyrannical regime. There was nothing free or fair about them. Iran's regime has made a mockery of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, even as it claimed legitimacy for itself as a government. Since 2017, the regime has had to face a virtual powder keg of resistance. And even in the face of harsh repressive measures against demonstrators, over 30,000 people arrested, many executed. Since 2022, the resistance has not only continued, it's deepened, led by this National Council of Resistance of Iran. We have to recognize and say our prayers for the some 3,000 people associated with the resistance who've disappeared through arrests, murders, or kidnappings in just the last couple of years. What a tragedy, the best and the brightest of a young generation. And yet, still more youth and women have joined. That shows courage, strength, determination, and a future. They join because they want a future of freedom. They want democracy. They want to live in a state that's peaceful and integrated and respected in the world community, not headed by a bunch of outlaw mullahs. They chose and they are choosing their future for this great country of Iran. Since August of 2023, the regime has intensified its efforts against resistance leaders living abroad. I see we've got some security here, and that's not by accident. The regime has initiated charges, held sham trials. It's an effort to gain international support, and this after 100,000 MEC members have been ruthlessly imprisoned and executed in Iran in recent decades. Of course, these new proceedings, they're a total sham. They don't have the norms, they don't have the standards of a real trial. Amnesty International calls it like it is. They know what it is. And we in the West must not recognize these proceedings as legitimate. We must not honor what this regime is attempting to do to the brave resistance leaders who live and work abroad. Now, the real message of hope was delivered by the people of Iran in the elections on March 1st. They delivered that message by refusing to participate in those elections. Even the regime couldn't hide the fact. They admitted the participation was low. They said, I think, something like 40%. Well, let me tell you something. My friends on the inside say the participation was 7%. and those were basically the employees and the families of the regime who had no choice. So the people have passed their judgment. A regime that murders its own citizens, its women and young people, has been delegitimized by its own people. The people of Iran are saying no more. But now what? Now what? Does there have to be a bloody uprising, a war for people to find their justice and freedom, or for the region to find peace? I think there's another way, though none of us can guarantee that it's going to be easy or safe or even quick. And that way is this organization, the NCRI, led by Mrs. Rajavi. Look, this organization has leadership, it has structure, It has commitment. It has a positive democratic program for change. The 10-point plan would bring democracy and human rights to Iran and peace and stability to the region. We have here the future government of Iran. Look, I spent most of my adult life as a soldier, and I'm here to tell you that we can't do it for you. U.S. boots on the ground, that's not going to solve the problem. The only way the problem can be solved is by you. But here's the point for our American and European friends who are listening, and I hope they are listening. We have to face the truth about this regime. It is not reformable. It is not going to alter its policies, and no amount of pleading, cajoling, or appeasing will change its trajectory. We've got to condemn the sham trial of MEC leaders and refuse to honor any results. Instead, we've got to bring charges against the leaders of the regime in Tehran for terrorism and aggression. We've got to openly support the rights of the Iranian people to resist, to choose their own government, as enshrined in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Protest and resistance is not illegal. It's mandatory in this circumstance. And like Secretary Pompeo, I went through Camp Ashraf a few years ago. We've got to ensure the complete protection of the Iranian political refugees at Camp Ashraf III in Albania. And we've got to assure them that the rights stipulated in international and European conventions on human rights are respected and honored. No more bullying by democratic governments trying to appease the regime in Iran. No more. Now here's what we in the West could do and should do. We should take away the legitimacy of the Ayatollahs. We should ban their regime from international organizations, confiscate their hidden wealth abroad, sanction their leaders, diplomats, and traitors, cut them off from Western finance, technology, and trade that's sustaining the Revolutionary Guards and their engines of repression, and above all, hold them legally accountable for the violence in the Middle East. It's not just a matter of politics. It's not just a matter of deterrence. We must use the weapons of international law. And at the same time, we need to move step by step to recognize the legitimacy of the NCRI and enable it the NCRI on a transitional basis to become the new government of Iran. That's the path. That's the path forward for democracy, for peace and stability. And ladies and gentlemen, we cheer you, we support you as best we can, but the future is in your hands. God bless you.
We will now hear from General James Jones, the first National Security Advisor in President Obama's administration. During his military career, he served as the 32nd Commandant of the Marine Corps, Commander of the United States European Command, and Supreme Allied Commander Europe. He has also served as Chairman of the Atlantic Council. I must also add that among General Jones's proudest achievements is securing a prominent position on the Iranian regime's blacklist, particularly for his support of Mrs. Rajabi and the MEK. Please welcome General Jones.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for that warm greeting. I'm honored to be here. I owe you a brief explanation about my attire. I woke up this morning in southern Florida. I woke up this morning in southern Florida. I was to catch a 7 a.m. flight to fly to Washington. My plan was to go home, put the correct uniform on, and be here in plenty of time. Unfortunately, the IRGC stopped the flight, canceled a JetBlue flight. Can you believe that? And but I persevered. I found another airline where the IRGC didn't interfere with their flight schedule. Unfortunately, I came in at Baltimore, and I'm late, but I'm happy to be here. So Madame Rajabi, Secretary Pompeo, happy to see him here, General Clark, Ambassador Joseph, the brave people of Iran, and also to the regime for whom much of what I have to say is intended. You know, years ago, when I was much younger and working in Washington, I asked a friend of mine, what does it take to succeed in Washington? And he looked at me and he says, Jim, that's easy. You should be for what's going to happen. And so my remarks today is to the regime, say, you should be for what's going to happen. And what's going to happen is a free, prosperous Iran, shortly. So today, as we convene in this beautiful hall, let's all of us acknowledge the gravity of our shared reality. The Iranian regime still persists as a central hub of terrorism in our world. This is not a mere assertion, it's an indisputable truth, woven into the fabric of the regime's actions, which sows chaos, instability, and anguish throughout the Middle East and through much of the world. Seated in Tehran, this regime embodies the head of the snake, as has been mentioned before, of Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism around the world. It's a venomous force. All snakes have venom. It's a venomous force that imperils peace, prosperity, and freedom, and justice. It's for this reason that the Iranian people and their organized resistance are determined to crush the head of this snake once and for all. And that day will not come too soon. But we must especially do some work here in Washington to make sure that we are willing to do the right thing to make this happen. This week, it has been reported that the U.S. government is stepping up its search for an Iranian intelligence operative loose here in the U.S. The FBI suspects this individual of planning assassinations, including against current and former U.S. officials, and including specifically our former Secretary of State, who you just heard from. I'm delighted to see him alive and well, and I listened to his words carefully, and I think we should all be inspired by his message, and we would also hope that he would return to public service very quickly. So additionally, in November, Alejo Vidal Quadras, a European politician and ex-vice president of the European Parliament, became an assassination target. Hired criminals were allegedly employed to carry out this act, motivated by his active support for the MEK and the NCRI. But ladies and gentlemen, while the ruling mullahs may project an illusion of strength through terrorism and violence, nothing can hide their profound vulnerability at home. Their fervent support for terror proxies across the region is not a testament to their strength, but an act of desperation, an attempt to cling to power in the face of mounting opposition, coming up from the streets of Iran in increasing numbers every year. The March 1st parliamentary elections, boycotted by the Iranian people, really served as a resounding resignation and repudiation of the regime's legitimacy. The overwhelming majority of Iran's population opted for abstention, a poignant sign of their yearnings for democratic regime and change. And despite all the fraud, according to the regime statistics, less than 8%, and I will say 7% in deference to my friend General Clark, less than 7% of the voters in the capital participated. This was effectively a referendum and a vote by the Iranian people in favor of ending the rule of the clerics in Tehran. While the regime is getting weaker, the organized opposition, led by resistance units and NCRI and others, which are teams of democracy activists operating across the country, is gaining strength and appeal among the population. Witness the tremendous testimony given by the brave young women we just heard. This is Tehran's nightmare. And it's a nightmare that is growing rapidly, and it's a nightmare that will come true, and it will come true sooner than you think. Indeed, since 2017, the Iranian people have risen in successive nationwide protests, courageously demanding the overthrow of the clerical regime. The resounding chants of "down with the oppressor," be it the Shah or the supreme leader, resonate with a fervent desire for freedom and self-determination. The Iranian people, bolstered by organized resistance, possess the power to dismantle the regime's stronghold in Tehran and usher in a new area of peace and prosperity for the region. However, for this region to materialize, it is imperative that Western capitals, particularly this capital, forsake the policy of appeasement and embrace a resolute stance towards Tehran, one that is unmistakable. The Iranian people and the resistance units have the right to resist the oppressive regime and its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and it is the moral obligation of the international community to stand in support of this effort. An unequivocal stance by the United States government not only reassures the Iranian people, who love America, by the way, it would also reassure friends and allies throughout the Arab world, and this is a task that is not yet complete. But it can be done, but it has to be done from this capital. With unwavering solidarity in support of the quest for freedom and democracy, let us unequivocally recognize the right to resist and to stand up to tyranny. It's been said many times, but it bears repeating. The imperative toppling of the regime is not a distant dream, but it is an attainable goal, drawing closer with each passing day. And yet it necessitates the collective endeavor from all who champion justice and human rights. No weakness, no falling back, no equivocation, just do it. We all know that the right to rebel against tyranny is morally justified, enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a beacon guiding nations towards protecting human dignity and freedom. And since its inception in 1979, the Iranian regime has systematically obstructed peaceful avenues for political expression, clinging fervently to the doctrine of absolute clerical rule. The alternative to this oppressive regime is clear. It's a democratic, secular, non-nuclear republic that upholds human rights and fosters peace in the Middle East and elsewhere. Yet even as the Iranian people strive for a brighter future, they face relentless persecution at the hands of the regime. The People's Mojahedin Organization of Iran, or the MEK, and NCRI have borne the fruit of the regime's brutality, with its members subjected to arbitrary arrest, kidnapping, torture, and execution. In 1988, over 30,000 of its supporters were massacred by the mullahs. Yet Tehran failed to crush the movement. To the contrary, decades later, it is now the children and the grandchildren of relatives of those massacred 36 years ago who are at the forefront of the protests in Iran. The MEK members, especially the women, paid the ultimate price in order to create a spread the culture of resistance in Iran. And it is this culture that cannot be destroyed. On the contrary, the more the regime kills, the deeper this culture gets. So failing to crush the movement for change, Tehran has resorted to a new ploy. In the summer of 2023, the Iranian regime announced that it plans to prosecute the leadership of the Iranian resistance, including key MEK members, on baseless charges. A key objective of this sham trial is to demonize the opposition, setting the stage for further executions within Iran and orchestrating terrorist attacks against opposition members abroad. It also underscores the fear the moment continues to incite within the regime's ranks and the increasing appeal of this movement among younger generations, and that is encouraging. So the regime's other goal is to create false judicial precedents for MEK leaders and issue red notices with the Interpol to extradite Iranian resistance leaders back to Iran. The international community must reject that movement. And frankly, if anything, it's the regime's officials and perpetrators who should be held accountable and brought to trial for their role in committing widespread atrocities, acts of genocide, and crimes against humanity over a span exceeding 40 years. That is where the accountability lies. The Iranian regimes to coerce Albania into denying the rights of thousands of the members of the Iranian resistance now residing at Ashraf III near Tirana underscore the relentless quest to stifle dissent, even beyond its borders. It shows graphically how fearful the regime is of the MEK as an alternative. Albania must be fully engaged and committed to ensuring all rights enshrined in the 1951 Geneva Convention, the European Convention on Human Rights, and all international laws for Iranian refugees at Ashraf III. It is interesting to note that the regime has actually told the government of Albania that they will continue to exert and deploy cyber attacks against the Albanian government until the people of Ashraf III are expelled from Albania. We can stop this, and we will stop this. As we commemorate the International Women's Day, let us pay homage to the countless women who valiantly opposed the clerical regime, from Nadia Aga Sultan in 2009 to Masha Amini in 2022, and the thousands who paid the ultimate price in 1998. Today, Iranian women, especially our esteemed leader, Mrs. Rajavi, continue to spearhead the movement for change, embodying unwavering courage and resilience in the face of adversity, terrorism, and massacres. They believe that the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others, as Mahatma Gandhi once said. The NCRI and its president-elect, Maryam Rajavi, have championed a 10-point plan, as you've heard today, but bears repeating, a 10-point plan for a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear republic in Iran. This Jeffersonian document, and I use that intentionally because it's correct, it's a Jeffersonian document that delineates a vision free from the shackles of extremism, terrorism, and tyranny, where power is vested in the hands of the Iranian people through free and fair elections. Thank you. How can any American leader on either side of the aisle disagree with that? How can anyone disagree with that? It is incredible that we still struggle in educating our own national leaders with what exactly Mrs. Rajavi's goal is all about. We must do better than that, and I pledge that General Clark and I and Ambassador Joseph and Secretary Pompeo and all of the ones that are privileged to appear before you once in a while, we will work on that, and we will change those opinions. We will change those opinions in the halls of the Congress of the United States, in the executive branch of our government, and most importantly, in our media. That is something we can do, and that will propel and dispel all of the misconceptions that exist and have not been put to bed yet, but they will be. In the Jeffersonian quote, Thomas Jefferson once said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." And that's an absolute correct quote, and it applies to everything we're trying to do here. So let us therefore be eternally vigilant for liberty. Let us stand in unwavering solidarity with the Iranian people in the organized resistance as they forge towards a brighter future. Let us also reaffirm our steadfast commitment to supporting their legitimate aspirations for freedom, democracy, and peace. And together, let us ensure that the Iranian people have the space and the strength to succeed in their mission to crush the head of the snake of repression, terror, and mayhem in Tehran, paving the way for a new dawn of hope for Iran and the Middle East, and greater peace in the world. Thank you. And if I could close on a personal anecdote, I was privileged to serve for a couple of years, 2009, 2010, as President Obama's first national security advisor. And I want you to know that at no time during that time did the words Camp Ashraf or MEK ever come to my attention. I don't know why, but I know that when I left the White House in late 2010, I was ignorant about the contribution that the brave people at Camp Ashraf 1 were making on a regular basis to our American forces, providing key information from within Iran, information and intelligence that we probably couldn't have received. There was a spirit of cooperation that existed. The American forces, when they came across Camp Ashraf, had meetings, collegial meetings, and said, "Would you please disarm? And if you disarm, we will give you a safe conduct pass for everybody who lives at Camp Ashraf." Roughly 4,000 people. I found out about this after I left office. And the relationship went on, and we have distinguished senior Army officers who were assigned by the High Command to have a liaison with Camp Ashraf and the American forces. And they did this, and it was a great relationship. Then when the United States decided to pull its forces out, I'm told that they went to the government of Iraq and said, "We are leaving, but we want you to take care of the people at Camp Ashraf because we will no longer be here." And of course, that government said, "Oh yes, we'll take care of them." And we all know what happened. What happened very quickly thereafter was, once while I was in New York City, my phone rang at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I heard gunfire in the background. And it was a call from Camp Ashraf telling me that uniformed Iraqi soldiers were attacking Camp Ashraf and killing people. And frankly, there are videos that exist of that. I have one. So I hung up the phone and I called the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral Mullen, and I called Jim Mattis, who is the commander of the Central Command, and I said, do you know what's going on at Camp Ashraf? They had no idea. Now it was just happening, so that makes sense. But the fact that it also was what also was happening at the same time was our Secretary of Defense, Bob Gates, was on an official visit in Iraq. And it just struck me as odd that the hubris of the Iraqi regime to do something like this while the American Secretary of Defense was visiting the country signaled that we were heading down a path where the collaboration between the Iraqi government and Tehran was obvious in the making. And it frankly went from bad to worse. At Ashraf, with successive other raids, it caused a federal court had to find that the MEK should be delisted as a terrorist organization by court order. It was resisted in our State Department. And finally, when the court threatened greater action, they finally lifted that terrorist designation. Then the promise was made that the people of Camp Ashraf, if they located to this wonderful place called Camp Liberty, and it was renamed Ashraf II, they would have a better chance of eventually getting out of the country. That turned out to be a false promise. Eventually, of course, we did, and the treatment that the people at Camp Ashraf II received was also subpar and not in keeping with what I think the best of our values and the best of our instincts are as Americans. We take care of people who are being oppressed. That's our history. We reach out to them. We reach out to children, and we reach out to the families, and we take care of them. We did not do a good job. We did, however, succeed in getting all of the people at Camp Ashraf II to go to Albania, and I'm very grateful to the Albanian government for their willingness to do that, despite the difficulties that have recently happened, and for which I hope that our government is negotiating a relationship that allows Camp Ashraf III people to live in peace and continue to be committed to what we all need to see, and that's the end of this oppressive regime. I tell you that story from a personal standpoint because, like General Clark, I was a Marine for 40 years, and for 40 years I was very proud of the good things my country was able to do in World War II and Korea and Vietnam and all these other places where we really genuinely tried to deliver peace and stability and democracy to people who otherwise, without our efforts, would not have had them. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. The United States has a moral obligation as one of the leading countries in the world to come to the aid of people who are trying to establish democratic regimes and have their families prosper, live in peace and security. We will not stop until this happens in Iran. Thank you.
I now have the honor of introducing Ambassador Robert Joseph, who was Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security and Special Envoy for Non-Proliferation. Before that, Ambassador Joseph served in the National Security Council as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Proliferation Strategy, Counterproliferation, and Homeland Defense.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And good afternoon to everybody. It is terrific to be here this afternoon in the company of so many friends from Iranian American communities really across our great country. It's wonderful to see you all. And I know that we are all united in the pursuit of a free and democratic Iran and the end of this religious dictatorship that has hijacked the great Persian nation and Islam itself. Given established protocol, I knew that I would be the fourth person to speak, following three very prominent, very distinguished statesmen and soldiers. All three, I believe, to be American heroes. And given the amazing accomplishments and the amazing experiences of Secretary Pompeo, General Clark, and General Jones, I knew that there would be very little left for me to say, because individually and collectively they would have said everything I would have hoped to say and say it much more eloquently. So what I'll do is pose three questions for you. Questions that I believe need to be addressed if our goal of a free Iran is to be achieved. The first is why after 45 years, we're still talking about a regime that's built on repression at home and terrorism abroad. Put another way, how has this malign regime managed to avoid its inevitable fate of being, in the words of President Ronald Reagan, consigned to the ash heap of history? The short answer, I believe, is twofold. First, the regime is willing to use whatever means necessary to hold on to power. Its oppression, its pervasive corruption know no bounds. In the 1980s, it conducted mass executions of tens of thousands of opponents, especially focused on the principal domestic threat, both then and now, the MEK. The murder spree has continued until today. In the past few years, the regime has killed thousands more in the streets across Iran. Thousands and thousands more have been imprisoned, and millions have been denied their basic human and civil rights. I know these are not just numbers or statistics. I know this is deeply personal for many of you here today, especially those who have lost your parents, who have lost sisters and brothers, sons and daughters in the mullahs' killing fields. Your determination to right what is a historic wrong is truly inspiring for me. While the regime has become adept at applying a mix of modern technology with medieval brutality, the people still rise up. And while the mullahs have developed an impressive array of cruise missiles and drones and ballistic missiles, they have lost all legitimacy with their own people. In fact, the Iranian people, the first and foremost victims of this regime, have become the greatest threat to the regime. A second reason for the regime's survival is the failure of the international community to stand up to Iran's terrorism, to its regional aggression, and to its crimes against humanity. Russia and China, through their purchase of weapons used to kill Ukrainians and the purchase of Iranian oil, both have become strategic partners with the mullahs without regard to funding terrorism or domestic repression. We should expect nothing less from Putin and Xi. But what about the Western democracies, who, with few exceptions, have consistently made the wrong choice in favor of the regime And I think this is reflected in policies that have propped up the regime, providing the regime with resources to conduct terrorist acts around the world, to pursue regional aggression, to become a virtual nuclear weapon state, and of course, to repress the Iranian people. And this leads me to my second question, and that is, what's behind this record of bad choices, this record of appeasement? In part, I think it's wishful thinking. How else can one explain the false but seemingly never-ending hope that the regime, if only granted more concessions, will become more moderate? A false hope. In part, it's mirror imaging. How else can one explain the belief that the regime will actually honor its commitments when it has an unblemished record of failing to do so? In part, it's the now revealed Iranian-sponsored disinformation efforts that have been very effective in a most perverse way in shaping the views of many so-called experts in academia and think tanks. How else can one explain the public attacks by these useful idiots, to use Lenin's term, on the democratic opposition and their support for a regime that has committed horrific atrocities against the Iranian people? I say shame on these useful idiots. Shame on them. Their effort to turn the world upside down will not succeed. Incredibly, some of these regime influencers, if I can use that term, have taken high-level positions in our government, serving as architects of the failed and flawed nuclear agreement, and in the most prominent case, becoming, and you can't make this up, becoming the Iran envoy until losing his security clearance 1 year ago. Again, shame on these people. But most of all, the foundation of appeasement is the failure of leadership and the resulting bad choices concerning national security interests and a willingness to betray the moral imperative of defending human rights. This is not a blame America first statement. This is a responsibility shared by almost every Western democracy. How else can one explain the failed policies over 20 years intended to constrain Iran's nuclear program through negotiations and the acceptance of Raisi as a legitimate head of state when he personally participated in the mass murder of thousands, a man with blood on his hands? How else can one explain the decision to relax sanctions with the sale of Iranian oil, an act that since 2021 has netted the regime over $90 billion that was spent not for the betterment of the Iranian people, but to support Hamas and other proxies, to build more drones and missiles, and to recruit and pay assassins to kill opponents of the regime in Spain, here in the United States, and in other countries. This is the evilness of the regime that we are dealing with. This leads to my third and final question, and that is, what needs to be done? Drawing on my involvement with the Democratic opposition for more than a decade, I believe we need to act now and act decisively. There has never been more urgency. At most, Iran is 1 or 2 months away from having a nuclear weapon, awaiting only a political decision to go forward. When it decides to do so, it will be a game changer with potentially catastrophic consequences. How that game will turn out is anyone's guess, but it is certain that the world will be a much more dangerous place. And we need to stop Iran now from killing more of our soldiers and our citizens in the region and at home through proxies and by Iranian agents. Striking empty warehouses in retaliation only signals weakness and encourages more deadly assaults on Americans. There will be no better time. We need to reject the proposition, a popular one at the State Department when I was there, that while we may agree with you 100%, now is not the time. Well, ladies and gentlemen, now is the time. This is a desperate regime. A desperate regime. While the mullahs may have tried to put forward a veneer of legitimacy through fake elections and sham show trials, no one has been fooled, least of all the Iranian people, who just last week, as others have pointed out, boycotted the rigged elections with what was likely an historic low turnout. The people continue to protest even as they risk their lives in rejecting the dictates of the regime. The regime's foreign aggression through terrorist proxies in Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Gaza is also an act of desperation, using the specter of foreign enemies to divert and subvert the attention of its own domestic opposition. This will fail as well, as the Iranian people have simply had enough. I need to be clear, as others have, that this is not a call for military intervention by U.S. armed forces. But we can no longer postpone taking deliberate and decisive steps to pressure the regime with real and effective sanctions maximum pressure is practiced by Secretary Pompeo and his team in the Trump administration. But the goal of this pressure should not be to encourage Iran to negotiate on its nuclear program, a seductive but feckless pursuit. Rather, the goal must be to isolate and destabilize the regime while supporting the democratic opposition in overthrowing the religious dictatorship from within by the Iranian people. Our policy should also be to support the resistance, those brave men and women who continue to make the ultimate sacrifice for a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear Iran. This support can come in many forms, from helping to ensure the protection and rights of the political refugees in Albania, to public and policy statements that recognize the right of the Iranian people to self-defense in their rejection of a tyrannical government. This is a regime that denies its own citizens, and I'll quote Jefferson as well, the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These rights, enshrined in the American Declaration of Independence almost 250 years ago, are as important and relevant today as they were then. As others have stated, these and other goals are best conveyed in the 10-point plan of Mrs. Rajavi in the NCRI, a plan endorsed by hundreds of leaders around the world with bipartisan support in our own Congress. Today, the choice is clear between a dark dystopian existence and a positive democratic vision for the future of the Iranian people. It's time to choose, it's time to act. As Mrs. Rajavi has said, we must crush the head of the snake. In a few days, we'll celebrate Nowruz, a celebration of renewal and rebirth. let us pray for the rebirth of the great Iranian nation and the end to the nightmare of the mullah's rule. As it was in my country 250 years ago, and this is a message to you, to all members of the NCRI, to the brave residents at Ashraf 3, and most of all, to those in the frontline resistance units in Iraq. You will prevail. The people of Iran will prevail. Freedom will prevail. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
We are now privileged to present a video clip shedding light on the remarkable role of women in the ongoing struggle in Iran. This footage captures the resilience, strength, and vital contributions of women who have played a pivotal role in the fight for justice and freedom. Let us now delve into this powerful visual narrative that highlights the inspiring stories of women, including the political prisoners in the forefront of the Iranian movement for change.
Iranian women's movement in contemporary history. Under the Shah's dictatorship, women were executed in the struggle against it. Marzia Skouyi, Fatemeh Amini, Mehnoush Ebrahimi, Behjat Tiftakchi, Shirin Moazzed. Women in the struggle against Khomeini. From the onset, Khomeini waged war on women with the infamous slogan of either the veil or a beating on the head. But Iranian women also fought back with their massive demonstration, while the PMI women and girls were at the forefront defending the protesters on that day. In 1979 in Shiraz, Nasrin Rostami, a young PMI supporter, died after being shot by Revolutionary Guards. The clerical regime started slaughtering the PMI members and sympathizers, including young girls, in the aftermath of the June 20th, 1981 peaceful demonstrations. Even teenage girls who had refused to give their names to the Revolutionary Guards were executed without establishing their identities. And other women who, after years of torture in the Shah's prisons, were executed by the mullah's regime. Masoumeh Shadmani, or Mother Kabiri, Ashraf Rajavi, and dozens of other female freedom fighters. Quite a few PMI women gave birth to their children in Khomeini's dungeons. The struggle of PMI women in the regime's jails has continued for the last 4 decades. Maryam Akbari Monfared was arrested and sentenced to 15 years in prison in 2009 for supporting the PMI. Additionally, 3 of her brothers and 1 sister were executed by the mullah's regime for their support of the PMI. After enduring torture, Maryam was banished to the prison of Semnan and was subsequently sentenced to 3 more years in prison. Another crime attributed to her is seeking justice through legal action against her executed siblings in the massacre of political prisoners in 1988 by the mullah's regime. Maryam Akbari Monfared wrote in a letter, "We are seeking justice and insisting on justice in the hope that no more families would have to mourn their children. We have lived through the terrible and torturous decade of the 1980s. That's why we are thinking of and seeking justice so that the future generations of Iran would not have such a terrible experience. In another letter, Maryam Akbari Monfare wrote, "The 1988 massacre is ongoing. The execution and killings of innocent people are the continuation of that massacre. The killing of protesters in 2009, 2017, and 2019 is the continuation of the 1988 massacre. Persisting on the call for justice for the victims of the 1988 massacre is identical to the struggle for freedom." The mullah's judiciary arrested Masum Yavari in Golpaigan, Isfahan, on the 12th of December 2023 on charges of membership in the PMY. They sentenced her to 13 years of imprisonment. Marzia Farsi, 56 years old, a mother of 2 children, and the sister of a slain PMY member, Hassan Farsi, has been sentenced to 15 years in prison. Forough Taghipour, 29 years old, was sentenced to 15 years in prison. She was arrested in February 2020 for her ties to the PMY. She was released in February 2023 after 3 years of imprisonment, but was re-arrested on the 23rd of August 2023 in Tehran. Nasim Gholami was arrested in September 2023 for supporting the PMY. She has been accused of baghi, or armed insurgency, a charge that is punishable with execution, amputation of limbs, or long prison sentences. Despite the incarcerations, tortures, pain, and anguish, the women of Iran are determined to continue their struggle to the end to achieve freedom.
It is with great pleasure and honor that we welcome a distinguished delegation of Iranian American women amongst us today. This esteemed group embodies the spirit of resilience, leadership, and cultural richness within the Iranian American community. Today, we have the unique opportunity to hear from and engage with these accomplished individuals as they share their perspectives, experiences, and insights. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to our esteemed delegation of Iranian American women. Sima Yazdani, Senior Manager, Data Analytics and AI Solutions, Cisco Systems. Dr. Azadeh Sami, a pediatric physician. Dr. Ashraf Zadshir, Director of Medical Education and Family Medicine Residency Program at EMC. Dr. Nilufar Ehsani, obstetrician and gynecologist. And Ms. Homeira Hesami, medical physicist at Las Colinas Cancer Center. Dear friends, distinguished guests, and leaders of Iranian American communities from across 41 states. I'd like to share a story of a young girl who, in the 1970s, as a 19-year-old college sophomore, dared to dream. Inspired by the writings of Samad Behrangi, a social justice activist in Iran, she founded a book club to foster intellectual exchange among her peers. it was swiftly extinguished because of the Shah's oppressive policies. This young woman later became a teacher, only to find her classrooms shadowed by the Shah's intelligence agency, Sabak. They monitored the university's pulse and dissent anywhere, and ready to quell at any cost. She, like hundreds of others at the time, was arrested for her social justice activities. This young woman was my mother. I was born after the 1979 revolution here in the US. But I can tell you, the fall of the Shah's regime was a watershed moment in Iran's history, signifying not just a political upheaval, but a societal transformation propelled by women's unprecedented involvement in street demonstrations. This era unveiled a collective yearning for progress, with women emerging as pivotal figures in the struggle for change, only to become the primary targets under the misogynist regime of the mullahs. Today, I stand before you as a mother, a physician, and a human rights activist to tell you that the echoes of past injustices continue to resonate. Amidst this backdrop, Mrs. Maryam Rajavi has emerged as a beacon of hope and defiance that spans across generations, from my mother's generation to my daughter's generation. In 1984, she etched her name in history as the first woman to lead a major political organization in modern Iran. Her 10-point plan articulates a vision for a nation built on the pillars of gender equality, human rights, and secular governance of a republic, directly addressing the grievances of women who have borne the brunt of Islamic fundamentalism's cruelty. As we reflect on this journey, clearly the struggle for women's rights in Iran is far from over. The legacy of those who fought against the Shah and those who continue to fight today underscores a relentless pursuit of justice and equality. And I am so proud of being part of this journey with my mother. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday marked the 2024 International Women's Day, and we as women have made incredible strides across the world towards achieving equality. But as we all know, the journey continues. I would like to start first by paying tribute to those who have paved the way with their sacrifices, resilience, and unwavering commitment to the cause of equality, freedom, and justice. And in that spirit of celebration and reflection, I want to draw your attention to the heroic resistance of Iranian women. Despite facing increasingly harsh conditions, the women of Iran have shown remarkable courage and resilience time and again. Their struggle against the oppressive clerical regime has taken many forms, from confronting security forces on university campuses to participating in street protests, from seeking justice for their fallen children to displaying unprecedented bravery, even in the confines of prison. Their actions, especially within the resistance units, underscore their determination to fight for a better future, despite knowing the severe consequences they might face. This year, the story of Armita Geravand moved us profoundly. At just 17 years old, Armita became a symbol of courage, innocence, and the grave injustices women and girls face under this regime. Her tragic encounter with the hijab patrols left her in a coma, and the subsequent efforts of this regime to silence her story remind us of the ongoing violence against women in Iran and the lengths to which this regime will go to suppress their voices. Yet, the regime's attempts to quell dissent has not silenced the Iranian people. Over the last year, more than 3,000 protests have erupted across various sectors, with women playing a leading role in approximately 2,200 of them. This widespread activism underscores the deep-rooted desire for change and the critical role women play in the fight for their own liberation. Furthermore, the participation of women and girls in the resistance units, carrying out 3,000 anti-repression operations across the country, signifies a growing spirit of perseverance and leadership in challenging the regime's suppression. Their actions are a testament to the collective aspiration for a democratic, pluralistic republic where freedom and equality are not just ideals, but realities. Among many stories of courage, the conditions of female prisoners like Massoumeh Senobari stand out prominently. Charged with leading protests in 2022, Massoumeh faces 7.5 years in prison under harsh conditions, isolated from the world, and deprived of basic human interactions. Her story is a stark reminder of the regime's brutal treatment of women who dare stand against oppression. So, in commemorating the 2024 International Women's Day, let us renew our commitment to supporting the Iranian women and their fight for equality and freedom. Let us stand in solidarity with them, amplify their voices, and ensure that their sacrifices pave the way to a brighter, more equitable future. Thank you.
It's truly uplifting to see such a great and vibrant turnout. Ladies and gentlemen, as we gathered here today, I am filled with profound sense of pride and admiration for the extraordinary women and girls of Iran. The courageous resilience and unwavering spirit in the face of adversity serve as a beacon of hope for us all. As a woman, a scholar, and medical doctor, I cannot help but to reflect on the struggle and aspirations of my fellow Iranian women and girls in the midst of long-standing discrimination and oppression by clerical regime in Iran. They have shown remarkable strength and determination for freedom and democracy, as the world witnessed during the 2022 uprising. The courageous resistance, both within Iran and beyond its border, is a testament to the enduring legacy of Mujahideen Khalq women. For 4 decades, they have fought tirelessly for free Iran and guided by the visionary leadership of Mrs. Mariam Rajavi. Her leadership has remained steadfast. Her commitment to the cause has empowered countless women to rise up and lead the fight for a brighter future free from the shackles of any forms of dictators. Recently, as you heard before, the clerical regime in Iran conducted a trial to prosecute leaders and members of the MEK, many of whom are women residing in Ashraf Tree in Albania. The regime's objective with this so-called trial is to suppress the youth and women in Iran by instilling fear to deter them from joining the MEK and resistance units. But it doesn't go anywhere, is it? How the regime attempt to suppress the youth and women of Iran will not succeed. The spirit of resistance among women is stronger than ever. and their determination and commitment to the cause remains unshaken. And I should say that I draw my inspiration from them, the women of Ashraf Tree, from brave and courageous girls in resistance units, and from the visionary leader, Mrs. Mariam Rajavi. And I am proud to stand with them. Let us stand united in our determination to support and honor women in resistance for their relentless struggle, their remarkable leadership, and their commitment to a free, secular, and republic Iran, where all Iranians can live in peace, dignity, and equality. Happy Women's Day to everyone.
Dear attendees, esteemed guests, today marks a significant milestone as we commemorate 45 years of the remarkable Iranian resistance, particularly highlighting the integral role played by the women within the Mujahideen Khalq movement. Over this time, the MEK has been a formidable force of resistance against dictatorships, advancing the cause of gender equality, diversity, and inclusion, rejecting self-serving egos, in favor of the well-being and freedom of the greater common good. Over the past 45 years, through 3 generations, it has been perfected in practice, methods, measurements, bridging complex cultural, historical, and traditional gaps, and barriers toward liberty, democracy, and progress. They stand on the history of more than 100 years of struggle for a free Iran. Their resilience has become synonymous with the broader fight for human rights and the pursuit of a society founded on the principles of justice and liberty. In confronting gender discrimination, the women of the MEK have been pioneers, dismantling societal norms that sought to marginalize women and girls. They have shattered barriers, proving that equality is not just an aspiration, but an essential reality for a society to flourish. The MEK's commitment to gender equality serves as an inspiration, emphasizing that the empowerment of women is fundamental to the advancement of the entire community. They have assumed pivotal roles in various aspects of the movement, showcasing their ability to lead with vision, resilience, and strategic acumen. These women are not just participants, they are architects of change, steering the course of the resistance toward the brighter future. I can assure they have gotten the science down, which should be studied and researched in university classrooms in the context of women's empowerment. For my part, I salute the women of the MEK for their tireless efforts, sacrifices, and triumphs. Their commitment to freedom, gender equality, and leadership serves as a beacon of hope for Iran. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Dear guests and my fellow Iranian American community leaders, my activism for democracy began right after the 1979 revolution. I joined those seeking social justice and freedom, which became our generation's guiding beacons in a time of repression under the Shah. Unfortunately, our revolution was hijacked by the Ayatollahs. As a young woman, I faced persecution and terror. I became a political prisoner, victimized by the misogynist machinery of oppression, designed to crush dissent and stifle the voices of freedom. Within the dark confines of a prison cell, I faced the horrors that have haunted countless Iranian women, horrors meant to break our spirits and erase our dreams. But we did not give in, we did not give up. Despite arrest, torture, and executions, our determination to see Iran liberated and our revolution fulfilled remained steadfast. The pursuit of a free Iran epitomized the extraordinary level of dedication exhibited by the MEK women, especially the mothers who gave up their children. Their sacrifice is no different than the sacrifices of Ukrainian mothers or other nations who have fought for freedom and democracy. Despite facing immense pressure, the MEK women have remained resilient, determined, and committed to justice and freedom in the face of oppression. You may ask how? They embraced the power of unity amidst diversity, leveraging their differences in background and upbringing to enhance their collective strength. By working collaboratively rather than in opposition, they have unlocked a synergistic force that amplifies their impact and creativity. That is why they are the shining light for Iran. Today, I stand before you not as a survivor of the horrors of misogynist regime, but as an empowered leader of the Iranian American community in Texas. My journey from the dark cells of Iran's prison to community leadership in the United States is a testament to the unbreakable spirit of Iranian women who have faced unimaginable adversities. Thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to introduce a vibrant and dynamic delegation of Iranian American youth joining us today. This group of inspiring individuals represents the future, bringing energy, innovation, and a fresh perspective to our gathering. Their diverse experiences, talents, and aspirations contribute immensely to the rich tapestry of Iranian American community. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from these young leaders as they share their unique insights and visions. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to our distinguished delegation of Iranian American youth. Mr. Sina Saidian, a recent graduate from UC Berkeley. Ms. Mariam Hosseini from San Diego, California. Ms. Michelle Shariat from Atlanta, Georgia. And Mr. Parsa Arya, a sociology major at Texas A&M.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a child of a political prisoner from Iran, I carry a narrative, not just of suffering and loss, but also of hope and relentless pursuit of freedom. My story begins not just with myself, but with my father, a man whose resilience in the face of adversity has been a guiding light in my life. My father faced severe repression in Iran, targeted for his unwavering support for the main opposition group, the MEK. His voice, which echoed the aspirations of many for peace and democracy, was confronted by the regime's repression. My father managed to survive as a political prisoner, leave Iran, and take refuge in the United States. He is now among the leaders of Iranian Americans fighting for a non-nuclear, secular Republic Iran. He is here today, carrying with him the messages and memories of his fellow cellmates. I've come to know the resistance through my father. Today, I want to talk specifically about a brave political prisoner, Mariam Akbar Monfarid. Her story symbolizes the struggle and sacrifice of thousands who are still languishing in prisons across Iran. I stand before you in support of Mariam and her daughters. Today, I stand before you as the voice of daughters of political prisoners, embodying the pain, the resilience, and the undying hope that defines our existence. It is a shared pain that I feel deeply, understanding the agony of those like Mariam's children. The price for freedom in Iran is indeed high, a testament to the nation's ongoing battle against religious tyranny, a tyranny that has weaponized religion against its own people, fostering terror and chaos, not just within its borders, but across the Middle East. Yet, amidst this darkness, there exists a shining hope, a story of resistance that continues to unfold each day in Iran. The resistance is not limited to the men and women on the front lines, but resonates in the hearts of boys and girls, sons and daughters, who, despite the shadows of dictatorship, dream of democracy. It is a movement rooted in the rich history of Iran, one that fought against the tyranny of the Shah and continues to fight until Iran is free. I am proud of my father. I am proud of Iran's freedom fighters, and proud in championing their right to self-determination, self-defense, dignity, and freedom. Thank you.
Howdy, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the one from Texas. It's a pleasure to be speaking here before you. And as we've heard from previous speakers, we're here in support of a free and non-nuclear and secular Iranian republic. This brings me to our republic here in America. Being an American, it's not simply a birthright, but a commitment to a set of values. I was born after the 1979 revolution in Houston, Texas. My father emigrated from Iran and my mother from Mexico. And it's because of this that I've learned that being an American, sorry, excuse me, is that better? All right. My mother and father, my father emigrated from Iran, my mother from Mexico. And it's because of this I've learned that being an American, it's not simply a birthright, but a set of values that we commit to uphold. One of which is the defense of human rights. In 2023, the world witnessed a troubling 43% increase in executions by the regime in Tehran. The mullah's regime holds the highest number of execution of athletes, artists, and young people in the world. So where does that exactly leave us as Americans? As Dr. Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we've heard these words echoed at our rallies before. However, we cannot simply stand by these atrocities, witnessing such violence in Iran committed by a regime that is working to terrorize its own people, terrorizing the Middle East, and endangering all of us. It is our duty as Americans to stand in solidarity with the people of Iran and to foster those same values that we cherish so much. The values that stand on the history of the resistance that took place in Valley Forge, marking a major turning point in the American Revolutionary War. When I speak of Valley Forge, I'm reminded of Ashraf III in Albania. I'm speaking of the resistance units in Iran who, like the founding fathers and freedom fighters of our country, selflessly devote themselves to the well-being of their nation in hope of a brighter future. They fight against tyranny, repression, religious persecution, and political violence to establish a democratic republic. Beyond political support, the Iranian people of Ashraf III and the MEK resistance units seek global and moral support, recognition, and amplification on the global stage. They're not asking us to fight their battle. They deserve our acknowledgement of their right to self-defense against the criminal IRGC and the tyrannical regime of the mullahs. We must ensure their struggle and their voices are heard in every corner of the world. And we must ensure America stands with them. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and Iranian American leaders, today I stand before you not just as a student activist, but as an advocate for human rights and democratic values, particularly concerning the situation in Iran. Our support for the call for regime change in Iran is not just an expression of political opinion, but a manifestation of our commitment to fundamental human rights, justice, and the global fight against tyranny. I was born after the 1979 revolution. Reflecting on Iran's history, however, it is evident that the widespread public dissatisfaction can lead to a substantial change, as we saw in the 1979 revolution. This historical context amplifies Tehran's fear of mass protests, knowing well that their power hangs by a thread of public consent. Nationwide protests signify a profound demand for regime change, a clear rejection not just of specific policies, but of the regime in its entirety. This is the existential threat that has compelled Ebrahim Raisi, Khamenei, and the IRGC to resort to draconian methods in a desperate attempt to maintain control. Yet the resilience of the Iranian people shines through the resistance units, many of whom are my age and are young women in Iran. It shines through the mobilization of resistance units across Iran, which represents a significant evolution in the protest movements. These units have been pivotal in organizing and leading protests, ensuring the integrity and uniformity of the protest messages nationwide. Despite internet blackouts and surveillance, their coordination and dissemination of information have kept the flame of resistance alive, transforming isolated incidents of dissident into powerful nationwide movements calling for a regime change for the people and by the people of Iran. Our solidarity across universities in the United States is much needed for the Iranian people and the MEK resistance units. As students and activists in the United States, we have a unique platform and responsibility to amplify the Iranian people's desire for a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear Republic of Iran. Our support can make a difference, encouraging further international recognition and political support for their cause. Let us stand together, united in our support for the Iranian resistance units, the people's fight for freedom and democracy. Let our voices be heard, and let us ensure that the flame of resistance in Iran is fueled by our unwavering support for their rightful quest for a better future. Thank you.
Good afternoon, friends and distinguished guests. As an Iranian American, I am often asked what the best path forward towards democracy in Iran is. Let me first start by addressing the path that we cannot take. For over 40 years, Western politicians mistakenly believed in a false notion that there was a moderate faction inside the Iranian regime. And blinded by the futile game of negotiations and nuclear deals, pro-appeasement administrations failed to support nationwide uprisings from 1999 to 2009 to 2017. But after the latest uprisings in 2022, the world finally recognized that the concept of reforming a murderous regime such as the Ayatollahs is and always was a myth. However, a new and equally sinister faction, led by the son of a deposed Shah, has emerged from the failed reform movement to co-opt the Iranian people's democratic aspirations. Many of us knew from day one that the son of the Shah and his posse of former Savak torturers, ex-reformists, and regime puppets represent nothing more than another feeble attempt to distract the international community and blow out the flames of regime change in Iran. Yet make no mistake, young Iranians responded to this charade loudly with chants of "Down with the oppressor, be it the Shah or the supreme leader." Now, with that said, I'm not here to relitigate the past or lament the efforts of the regime and its cronies to undermine our resistance. Instead, I'd like to shine a light on the inspiring vision of freedom and progress that young Iranians represent. In order for regime change to be successful, there must be a capable alternative to lead it. And year after year, new generations of young Iranian protesters are continuing the tradition of democratic resistance that was started over 40 years ago by the MEK and the NCRI. The brave young students in the streets today are focused, they are resilient, and they will not back down until the entirety of the regime is dismantled. Millions of Iranians inside and outside the country are inspired by the MEK because of its half-century of resistance against not one, but two separate dictators that have been determined to exterminate them to no avail. Indeed, as Secretary Pompeo remarked earlier, while some were focused on reforming the regime, the NCRI declared as early as 1979 that its mission was to overthrow the regime and establish a democratic republic. This consistency must not be taken for granted. Because of its track record and because of its commitment to its principles, the MEK has been subject to the most barbaric persecution imaginable. Yet it has remained steadfast in its commitment to its principles to fight against dictatorship and four basic principles. You see, neither the Shah's imprisonment and execution of student activists in the 70s, nor Khomeini's 1988 massacre of 30,000 political prisoners managed to weaken the MEK's resolve. As General Jones remarked, every single one of these victims has a son, they have a brother, they have a mother, a cousin, a spouse that is ready to fight and continue that battle for democracy and freedom today. Indeed, the protesters in the streets today are the descendants of this tradition of democracy and fighting for freedom, and that is why individuals can be killed, but the spirit of freedom can never be killed. Now, the key to the Iranian resistance to survival lies in its passion for freedom, which binds together across multiple generations in a common struggle. It is that passion and the knowledge of an established resistance that inspires Iranians as young as 18 years old to pour out into the streets, to risk their lives, to say no to this regime. Today's freedom fighters are inspired to fight because they know they are continuing a decades-long movement that is led by a capable resistance organization that has never taken a single day off. The MEK continues to resonate because its advocacy is not defined by its religion or its ethnicity, a social class, or even a political belief. Instead, its advocacy is defined by basic principles like democratic governance, like gender equality, economic freedom, and the separation of church and state. These are universal values that bind Iranians together across generations and across social backgrounds. In contrast to the barbaric regime of the Shah and of the mullahs, the MEK offers a forward-looking, inspiring vision that is based on secularism and democracy and which respects human rights and, most importantly, empowers its youth because it knows that those are the people who are going to determine the future of the country. Now, of course, the future of Iran will be determined by the people of Iran, but we must not forget that the MEK and the NCRI have played a very crucial part, whether directly or indirectly, in laying an intellectual foundation for regime change that is now being echoed in the streets of Iran every single day. Now, I personally was born after the revolution in 1979, and I've never been allowed to visit Iran because of my outspoken opposition to this regime. But I've had the privilege to get to know the young leaders of the Iranian opposition, and I have deep admiration for their commitment to securing freedom and democracy for their brothers and sisters in Iran. Let us not forget the sacrifices that young Iranians have made and are continuing to make to bring about a brighter future. To the youth in Iran, I say thank you for inspiring us with your resistance. We stand with your righteous fight to overthrow the mullahs and to establish a secular, a democratic, and a non-nuclear republic in Iran.
Thank you again, Mr. Sina Saidian, Ms. Mariam Hosseini, Ms. Michelle Shariat, Mr. Parsa Arya, Ms. Miki Mohammadi, Nicole Shariat, Mariam Kamandar, and Milad Hosseini. Please give them another wonderful round of applause.